Hello again. So next section of this topic then, in DNA and cell division, is mitosis. Hurrah! So mitosis is this then. It's cell division used for growth and repair. In mitosis, two new cells are produced from one cell and each cell is identical to the original cell. So it's a type of cell division, which is basically when cells get bigger and then they divide and produce more cells. It's used for growth. So obviously, if we want to get bigger, we're going to have to grow more cells. And it's also used for repair. So say, for example, you fall and cut your knee, you damage your skin cells on your knee, and then mitosis replaces those skin cells that you've damaged or lost. It's a quick way of growth because there's two new cells produced for every one cell. And each cell is identical to the original cell. So let's say, for example, again, you fall and cut your knee. You want to have identical skin cells growing back on your knee. You don't want something like liver cells or eye cells growing there. So you need to make sure that in mitosis you realise that each cell is identical to the original cell. Now this is a really cool little animation which shows mitosis. We can see an animal cell here, and you can see here what's going to happen. So the chromosomes lined up in the centre, and then they got pulled apart, and we got two new cells forming. If we watch that again, there's the chromosomes in the nucleus. They line up in the center of the cell and then they get pulled apart and the new nucleus forms around the two sets of chromosomes. So that's the gist of it. Let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. Now, to start off with, we need to know a little bit about cells and a little bit about chromosomes. So here's our typical animal cell. Within that we have the nucleus. And within the nucleus, we have our chromosomes. Now, in the last video, here's what we learned about. We said that in each adult cell, there are 46 chromosomes, or 23 pairs of chromosomes. So we said that those cells were diploid. Now, if we want to grow more cells, we do so through cell division, and normal cell division is known as mitosis. So if you go to the gym and lift loads of weights, your muscles are going to get bigger, and that's because you grow more muscle cells, and you would do that through the process of mitosis. Also, as you're changing from a child to an adult, you get bigger, and you get bigger because you grow more cells. And we rely on mitosis for that. Now, because we're growing more cells, you also need more DNA. Because you want all the cells that you grow to be exact copies of the ones that you produce. So let's look in a bit more detail at the chromosomes. So in each cell, we're saying that there is 46 chromosomes in the nucleus, or 23 pairs. Now let's look at one pair. What you would have in each cell is 23 pairs. But if we're just looking at one, and we line them up, this is what they look like. Just two pairs. So this is one pair of chromosomes. And on those chromosomes, you'll remember that they contain these little banded patterns, which are genes. Now, as I say, when cells are growing by mitosis, they each need to end up identical to each other. So that means they need the same DNA. So what's going to happen is, near the start of mitosis, the chromosomes change slightly and they become double-stranded. And we get something like this. Now what's happened here is each chromosome has copied itself. Now this is still one pair of chromosomes, but we can see here that each one is made up of two strands. So this one contains the pink part, as does this one, but the second strand is this blue part. Now, what we're going to call these parts is chromatids, and those are linked together by a central ring called the centromere. Now let's make sure that we're clear on that. So chromosomes are usually all unraveled in the nucleus, but just before mitosis happens, they condense and we can see the pairs of chromosomes, but they have to copy their DNA. So we end up with a pair of chromosomes which has 2 strands on each one, and each strand is known as a chromatid. So over at this side, one chromosome is just equal to one chromatid, but once they've copied, one chromosome equals 2 chromatids. So over at this side, we have got 2 chromosomes altogether, and we would just usually call them chromosomes. At this side, we have got 2 chromosomes made up of 2 chromatids each. So altogether, we have 4 chromatids. Now again, why is this so important? Why is this so confusing but yet so important? Well, remember what we said. If you want to grow bigger, you need to grow more cells. And to grow more cells, you need mitosis. But if we want to grow more cells, we need to make sure that they have all the identical information in them. So the only way we can do that is by copying the DNA so that we can then put a copy of that DNA into the new cells. Now remember, mitosis is cell division used for growth and repair. There is approximately 5 steps in them, and we end up with 2 new cells which are produced from one cell, and each cell is identical to the original. So if this one starts off with 46 chromosomes, each of these need to start off with 46 chromosomes each, and it needs to be exactly the same information. Now we say the cell at the start is called the parent cell, and the daughters produced at the end are known as the daughter cells. So let's get into the process of mitosis. So we start off here with the parent cell. Now, just so that we know what we're looking at here, this is a typical animal cell. We've got the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, the nucleus, and in here are chromosomes. So at the minute, we're looking at 2 pairs of chromosomes, or altogether 4 chromosomes. So let's look at them. Firstly, at the start of mitosis, the chromosomes condense and become visible. Next up, the chromosomes are double-stranded as the DNA has been copied. So instead of having single-stranded chromosomes, we now have double-stranded chromosomes made up of chromatids. So we still have 2 pairs of chromosomes. We still have 4 chromosomes altogether. But now we have 8 chromatids. So the DNA has been copied. The next thing that happens is the nucleus breaks down. So we can see that between 2 and 3 the nucleus has disappeared, and the chromosomes have now lined up in the middle of the cell. The next thing that happens then is the chromatids separate and move to the opposite ends of the cell, and the cell starts to split in 2. So we had our little diagrams like that, and then they got pulled to either end and it's split up, and this is what we're seeing here. So a chromatid gets pulled at each end. The cells finish splitting, the nucleus has reformed, and the chromatids are now just known as chromosomes again, because the information that is on these cells is exactly the same that was in the parent cell initially. So we just call them chromosomes now. Because these daughter cells have exactly the same information as the parent cell, we can pretty much say that they are clones. Now, I think it's really important to test your knowledge here. So here we have a little diagram of mitosis. What I want you to do is pause it here, give yourself about 5 minutes, and what I want you to do is look at the diagrams and look at the different stages and see if you can write a brief explanation for what's happening along the way during mitosis. And a good thing to do in a question like this is to remember to write what the comparison is between the start and the finish. Have the cells changed? Are they the same? Explain any changes. Okay, pause it here, off you go. Okay, so this is what you can have. So the chromosomes become visible, which we can see in this part. The nucleus breaks down, which happens between stage 2 and 3. The chromosomes become double-stranded. The chromosomes then line up in the center, and they're pulled apart, or they're split up. So one chromatid goes to each end, and then new nuclei forms, and the daughter cells are identical to the parent cell. Or you could say that they are clones. Now the next little part is another type of cell division known as meiosis. So this is cell division, but it's only used for gamete production, for sperm and eggs. So this means that it only takes place in the testes and ovaries, which are the organs that produce the sperm and the eggs, and the cells that are produced are haploid. Now, the reason they're going to be haploid is because if we have a sperm, which contains 23 chromosomes, and an egg, which contains 23 chromosomes, they will join up and form a zygote, which has 46 chromosomes. So it basically means that to produce a new person, half of the DNA or half of the information comes from the father's sperm, and half of the information comes from the mother's egg. Now, in meiosis, it was a little bit different from the last one that we looked at, mitosis. So in meiosis, the daughter cells, which are these ones, and there's 4 of them, have half the number of chromosomes of the parent cell. So if it was a human parent cell, it had 46 chromosomes, but each of these ones only has 23. Each of the cells is different from one another, and there are 4 cells produced in 2 divisions during meiosis. Now here's the process of meiosis. So we start with a parent cell and the chromosomes become visible. The DNA has been copied and each chromosome becomes double-stranded. So each chromosome is made up of 2 chromatids. Homologous chromosomes are going to line up in the middle of the cell, and then the homologous chromosomes separate and move to opposite sides of the cells, and the cell then starts to divide. Now, at the end of this first division, the cell is finished splitting and the chromosomes arrange themselves in the middle of the 2 daughter cells. And then after that, in the second division, the chromosomes split up into their chromatids and the cell splits again. This time, these cells that we've got produced at the end are gametes. So if it's in a male, they're sperm, and if it's in a female, it is eggs. So to give a little summary of that, we start off with the parent cell, which has 46 chromosomes. At the end of the first division, we have 2 cells, which have 23 chromosomes each. But because they're double-stranded, there are 46 chromatids another division takes place and one of the chromatids goes into each cell. And we end up with 4 daughter cells, each containing 23 chromosomes. And because each chromosome is single-stranded, there are 23 chromatids. Now, the number of chromosomes in chromatids can get very confusing. What's important here is that we start with one parent cell with 46 chromosomes, and we end up with 4 daughter cells, each with 23 chromosomes. And that takes place after 2 separate divisions. Now the next part is being able to compare mitosis and meiosis. So in mitosis, we saw that the daughter cells are genetically identical to each other. They were identical to the parent cell, and they were diploid cells, so we've got 46 chromosomes each. And mitosis also produces 2 cells in one division. So we basically start off with 1 cell, and after 1 division, we end up with 2 identical daughter cells, which are diploid and have 46 chromosomes. But meiosis was different. The daughter cells produced were genetically different to each other, and they were also genetically different from the parent cell. They were also haploid cells, which means they have 23 chromosomes each, and it produces 4 cells in 2 divisions. So we started off with 1 cell. After 1 division, we had 2 cells, and then another division took place, and we ended up with 4 cells. The information that was in this cell was different from the one that was in this, or this, and these cells were also different from each other. And because of this, meiosis produces variation, which is going to be important later on. Now, in most mitosis and meiosis questions, what you'll have to do is compare them, and there's different questions you can get. What ways do the cells produced by mitosis and meiosis differ? Now, in that case, you would talk about their genetic information. So is it the same as the parent cell? Is it different? You would talk about the number of chromosomes, and in that you would also talk about haploid and diploid. What ways do mitosis and meiosis differ? So in that part you could talk about the cells. You could also talk about the number of divisions. You could talk about the number of daughter cells, and you could mention all the stuff we've talked about in this part up above. But you must fully explain the difference. So we need to say, for example, in meiosis, the daughter cells are genetically different, but in mitosis, the daughter cells are genetically identical to each other. And I'm just showing you this diagram because it highlights how in mitosis, and if you look at the colours of the chromosomes and the number of them, the daughter cells in mitosis are identical to the parent cells. Whereas in meiosis, the daughter cells are genetically different from the parent cell. And as well as that, they are also genetically different from each other. None of these cells here contain the same information. Now, at different stages of your life, mitosis and meiosis are going to happen at different times and for different reasons. So, in an adult, we know that there are 46 chromosomes per cell. What will take place in the testes and the ovaries is meiosis, and that is a type of cell division used to produce gametes. The gametes will contain 23 chromosomes per cell. So when fertilization takes place, when the man and the woman love each other very, very much, the diploid number will be restored in the zygote, which will contain 46 chromosomes. That zygote will then divide by mitosis to form an embryo, and then as the embryo gets bigger and forms a fetus and then a child, mitosis has to take place to allow them to grow more cells, because that's basically the difference between a fetus and a child and an adult. As you move along, you get more cells, and the only way you can do that is through mitosis. That brings us back to adults then. And once adults stop growing, the only time they really need mitosis is to replace worn out cells or repair any damage to their bodies. But mitosis will take place in their reproductive organs, produces gametes. The gametes can then fertilise each other to produce a zygote, and the cycle continues on and on again.